16, 17, 18, 19. Hey everyone, this is Ben from T3 bringing you a store championship match from Shuffle and Cut Games in Southern California that took place on January 9th. On the right here, we have John D'Alessandri playing his Kate deck, and on the left, we have Raphael piloting his HB, Engineering the Future. Now, at the time of this game, the Most Wanted list was not in effect. That didn't kick in until early February, and as I said, this was the beginning of January. So I know a lot of players at this tournament came just bringing the most wanted list decks they possibly could. So with that being said, expect to see this is your prototypical Prepaid Kate, I'm sure, with full prepaids, ladies, all the clone chips, everything that you can imagine. And on the other side, Raphael, I'm sure, is packing much of the same. I expect NAPDs, I'm expecting Eli's, Architects, all the fun stuff that now is a little bit more difficult to play. But that being said, it looks like Raphael took a mulligan here and is just taking a look at his new hand and drawing up. I see an Ash and an Agenda, and it looked like a couple of ice, or at least one ice in there. So Raphael's taking his first turn to install, and see, this is I expect this is going to be a long game. That's pretty much how ETF went, and so Raphael just installed and take two clicks, or install and take two credits. And this tournament had a little bit of everything. There was a bunch of different Kates running around. There was a lot of ETF. I saw some pretty radical stuff as well, DLR Max, Val and all that fun stuff that you saw floating around Worlds, and it hadn't changed much. So, since Worlds anyway. But John, taking the free access off R&D, it seems good, playing Technical Writer and then Astrolabe. So not spending any money and already starting to get that Technical Writer built up, which is a great card. That was one that Noah McKee started, or at least made famous, I suppose, at Worlds, playing 3 Technical Writers out of his Prepaid Kate deck, and just because of how the Kate deck cycles and you see the same things over and over, and even without a click you might see 2 new cards get installed. Those are perfect conditions for Technical Writer, and that I expect to see really shine as this game kind of progresses. And of course, on Raphael's turn, took the building stance a little bit more. Doesn't want to give John any more free accesses off R&D, of course, and icing up a remote. So you might start getting that Ash installed and start putting pressure on John to at least start running through the bioroids. And John, doing a little bit of the same here, drawing a bunch of cards, trying to build his board state, getting that second Technical Writer in play, which early game is going to be huge. I expect late game that's going to kind of end up getting him 8+ credits in a single click. And Raphael, of course, doing the build-up HB thing, not spending money to install cards, gaining money, drawing some stuff. You know what they do, that type of deal. And John, aggressively drawing up. It doesn't look like we've seen any prepaids, but that clone chip self-modifying code is awesome. That's 4 more credits off those Technical Writers, and I can't quite make out what else he has in his hand. I see a Maker's Eye. There might be a Lady in there, maybe a Lucky Find. I think that's a Clot, which isn't really going to come up with any good in this matchup, I'm sure. I doubt Raphael's playing an HP Fast Advance variant, although that's definitely not out of the question. Not the most popular deck at this time, though. Foodcoats is definitely dominant, and for anybody that isn't sure, the word name Foodcoats, which is this, I'm pretty sure it's this list that Raphael is running here, that actually came from the old Redcoats HB deck, and it's kind of evolved into Foodcoats, the biggest include, of course, being the 5-3 agenda, or the 2-point agenda on the runner side, Global Food Initiative. So a little bit in Netrunner history there. These decks have crazy names, and I have a really hard time keeping up with them for the most part, but the more you know. And John looks like he's having a little bit of trouble trying to figure out what he wants to discard, and ends up pitching the Clot and Deus Ex. And that Deus Ex is a card that John really, really loves, and I know that's going to get some use here against HB. With the Heimdalls and the Ichis, both of those are APs, and Deus Ex is a really, really cheap way to break it. It might not be the most efficient way, because it, costs you a clone chip in this case, and basically clone chip and 2 credits with Kate's ability, but still, that's worth it if it means otherwise getting an Ichi 2 or even an Ichi 1 blowing up in your face. So that's going to give John a little bit of a safety net. And Raphael wisely puts the pressure on here with Turing and the double install in the remote. So this probably is going to be an Eve Breaker Bay grid play, and answer Turing, or good answer to Turing is that David three times to get through it, and with John's recursion, I'm sure that we're going to see that David a number of times on the day. I don't think anything else beats the efficiency of David on Turing for the remotes. And John trashing both of the economy cards, which it's huge for Raphael. Him being, or Raphael able to apply pressure. Waste those David counters, get those whittled down, keep installing stuff in that remote, and it forces John to spend his money. And now John's sitting at only $2, which can come up pretty quick out of a prepaid deck, but here you go. You're seeing Raphael here install and actually Jackson up a little bit. So he might be looking for, looks like he wants some more ice. I see a handful of upgrades, might be 2 ashes, maybe 3, and a caprice in there. So, so there we go. Using the single draw to pick that Eli back up. You don't see that very often. I'm pretty sure that was a single draw there. Raphael opting to not risk flooding his hand with agendas, and instead opted to just take a single draw for safety there. And this is a finals, or at least a top 8 match, guys. So a lot is on the line here. I'm sorry, I do not recall which game this was. But it is a top 8 match for sure. And John taking his time here trying to figure out what to do, and looks like gaining money, still not seeing those prepaids, but spending the turn to go from 2 to 9 credits. That's pretty good, worthwhile for sure. And passing it to HB, who looks like he's going to keep applying pressure in that remote. Stack it up over the Turing. That had to be the Eli, because that was the only ice that Raphael had in his hand. And again, single drawing. So I'm not sure if this is a fatigue thing, or if he's being overly cautious with his Jackson, or if Raphael just really doesn't want to draw that many cards. He might really like everything in his hand. And he is it's not forcing, but Raphael choosing to forfeit the Jackson to shuffle back some cards. So I'm sure he's going to be installing another asset or an agenda there, but I don't think we saw an agenda in that remote. So Raphael might drop the Adonis, I believe. I saw that earlier in his hand. So an Adonis and an Ash is a really great way to put pressure on John's economy. Or even just an Adonis, and yeah, John's immediately clicking, first click, taking a run for it, and clicking through Eli, and then using the David counter for the access, and yep, there's the Adonis. So more drain on John's David counter and his credit pool. But the beautiful thing about prepaid is that David, you can be sure we are going to see that over and over and over. So I'm sure Raphael has the idea of just trying to kill the counters. And at this point, I think there's no reason for John not to just run into that server, break the Turing with David, and then play a new program from his hand and overwrite the David, just to make it so he has instant access to it with that clone chip. I'm sure that's a game plan that John would love to make happen here. And a lot of options. John opting for money. I did see a self-modifying code in his hand as well, along with both. I can't quite make everything out. Lady is good. So Lady, and I'm sure he's going to play an SMC here, or at least to try and really benefit from Kate's ability. He doesn't want to miss a trigger or miss an opportunity to use that. And of course, it gets more money on technical riders. And John having 3 of those built up, it looks like 5, 4, and 1 counter respectively. So John almost has a 1-click lucky find and a 1-click sure gamble. He just has to install one more thing. And that's the strength of technical riders. You know, John can play the entire game as normally, you know, in a pretty standard fashion here, and those technical riders are just going to keep gaining him bucks that he can quickly gain access to later in the game. And Raphael, seeing John's build up here and just installing a handful of upgrades in that remote. If I had to guess, it's probably an Ash and a Caprice. That would be, I think, his best bet. And with how John's credit pool is looking, I think John is pretty locked out of that remote right now. So John's probably going to be forced to take a step back and build up a little bit more, at least get his economy back on track. Not seeing those prepaids, or not seeing any prepaids up until this point, probably having an effect. You know, I've seen at least one sure gamble and at least one dirty laundry or not dirty laundry, sure gamble, lucky find, and quality time. So that's at least, you know, a $2 gain that John's missing out by missing one of those prepaids. Of course, that benefit, you know, fluctuates if you get more. But John does look like he's hurting for those prepaids here and opting to trash a technical rider to get himself back on track a little bit and get back in this credit war. And probably anticipating, rightly so, the Ash and the Caprice in that remote. And John's going to need a handful of money in order to make his way in here. Especially, and Raphael reses the Caprice in response. So it's down to a Psy game, which looks like John has $8 left. So, oh, nope, he's exchanging his money. So I believe he has $8, or yeah, so he has $6. And even if John does win the Psy game, Raphael is going to be able to outtrace him. So Raphael opting not to pay for it, I think John just, I don't know if John actually went with his die roll on this one. He might have just kind of rolled the die to bluff. I didn't quite make out what was on that face, but being locked out of that server for now, John's probably going to be down to just drawing up and looking for more answers, or at least more economy. And yeah, John does draw. So on the other side of this coin, Raphael just wants agendas. You got to find them, man. Okay, so there was a beta test down. So I feel like Raphael dropped an Ash the first turn, and then since John didn't get baited into the run, installed the Caprice and the agenda, pretty much locking it down since John doesn't really have the economy to put up with HB here. But Raphael triggering the beta test, a risky proposition. We know there's no Jackson on the board here, and only getting an Architect over HQ with that one. So hopefully that there wasn't anything else there, and John may as well dirty laundry. And oh man, that's not what you want to see as HB. Seeing that global food in the beta test, that's really gonna hurt. I really don't think it was worth Raphael to trigger that beta test. He's in a really commanding spot, lots of ice, you know, even though nothing is rezzed in front of R&D. I just don't think it's worth triggering the beta test there, you know? And I'm sure Raphael's worried about, the long game, and you certainly don't expect to see a lot of agendas in HB, especially not on 3 cards out of a beta test. But I think that might be a bit of an overreach, and clearly John getting the benefit from it, immediate payout. And going back in the remote to try and clear out the upgrades while Raphael's not as incentivized to res everything and really try and keep him out. But at the same time, it is wearing down on John's David and lady counters. And John does have the recursion. I'm positive we're going to see a levy by the end of this game. But, Shaper does run out of recursion eventually. It might take a little while, and I know we've only seen the one clone chip, so still plenty left to go, but just something to keep an eye out for. And John's trying to go for the strike here with the Maker's Eye. If he hits anything out of these 3 cards, it's going to be a really big swing. That might be... Okay, so it was a piece of ice and then an archive memories and a hedge fund. So now Raphael does know that he has a little bit of time here. So he can try and build up. The remote is kind of sort of safe, but it's not something he can really score out of right now. But instead, he is opting to install and use the Jackson. I'm not sure I agree with that play. Again, these guys are in the top 8, and I believe it was a 30-player tournament, so it was really tough competition, but I think the Jackson there, Raphael should have, he should have held on to that, or at least just installed it in the remote, and try and force John to go back in and at least check it out. Puts a little bit more pressure on him, especially since Raphael knew that John didn't have any way, or that the next 2 cards on top of R&D weren't agendas. I think that just was a little bit too much there, but again, there's a reason that these guys are in top 8 and I'm not, so who am I to judge? And it looked like there was some money that Raphael threw back. And at this point in the game, neither player really has a lot of bucks. John sitting on $2, Raphael sitting on $4. Although John does have a lot of money sitting on technical riders. I think if he really wanted to just cash out immediately, John gets 9 credits and 2 clicks. Again, if you're keeping track at home, that's basically a lucky find with 3 prepaid. So it definitely pays to have lucky riders, to have technical riders in a deck like this, where you are going to be playing a lot of cards over and over and over. And we see right there the levy in John's hand. I saw a levy and a Gordian, and it looks like another quality time, but John doesn't really have the money to support any of it, so he's stuck to just drawing, and I'm sure he's looking for prepaids to try and make those events count that are in his starting to stock up in his hand. And Raphael is in a really, really good spot, at least right now. He doesn't have a lot of money, which is a big pain, but being able to draw into that hedge fund, which we had seen a moment ago, going back up to a more manageable spot, and he is going to be able to protect R&D now. So the Maker's Eye that John has in his hand is going to be a little bit more difficult. But this is... Okay. So after this far in the game, as you can see, this is a very, very typical Foodcoat deck. We've seen Ash, we've seen Caprice, we've seen Eli, Turing, Architect. All of these cards are so good, and has been kind of put down a little bit by the most wanted list. If this deck was made today, we would see a little bit more, or a little bit less out of influence cards. We might have to cut down on a Caprice, we might have to cut down on a Toll Booth or something. I'm really not sure what Raphael's influence was spent on, but we see the Architect and we see the Eli. I'm positive Raphael plays 2 more Elis, so there's 3 influence right off the bat. So both players here really trying to capitalize on the most wanted list not being in effect at this tournament. And John here is in a little bit of a pickle. It looks like he drew into a legwork, which he doesn't have. Well, he could play, but having Architect fire in the middle of a legwork, definitely not ideal. And John just opting to gain 2 credits for his last, try and money up a little bit, and hopefully secure his game plan a little bit more. I'm expecting John to play a hardware or a program and then take money from the Gordian blade just because, or take money from the technical writers, because why not, right? You install a hardware or program, technical writers go off, and then you get to trash the technical writer for some of the money you just lost. Really, really solid. And I'm positive we're going to see that very, very soon. John's kind of at that point with money, and Raphael is just getting his credit pool back established. And if he gets an Eve, or even somehow manages to get an Adonis installed in live, I think Raphael can really start to put John out of reach in this game, at least on the remote. And I'm not sure if John is thinking the same, but quality timing, and I did see a prepaid, and it looks like he's considering it. So yep, going with the prepaid, spending his dollar, and that dollar is just going to go on the technical writer. So he makes money doing this now. It's so good. Raphael sitting back, he did install a new card in that remote, so John could just take money off the technical writer and run. Now, it's, of course, a gamble with the Caprice and with an Ash, and I'm sure John is expecting an Ash here. I said John is a regional winner last year, along with multiple store champs. So John's certainly not new to Netrunner and really knows what to expect against top-tier opponents. So it looks like both players are just kind of trying to sit back, evaluate their hand, evaluate the board state, and try and see where they can strike easiest. John does have the multi-access sitting in his hand and available, but he doesn't have the money right now, but he's so close to just being able to nail pressure on R&D or HQ. So if he can get that Gordian back, he did just lose the Gordian though, and there's another lady. So John is, he must have some clone chips in his hand or something and plan on capitalizing. But Raphael taking advantage of the scoring window and scoring out the Vitruvius. So we have a 4-point game for all. Of course, that Global Food Initiative only worth 2 in the runner's score area. So definitely a huge impact on the game. I think that's probably the most impactful card out of Data and Destiny, and rightfully so. It's been in so many builds. Of course, I'm playing it in a bunch of decks. Gagarin, my own HB, of course. And even some other ones. I've seen NBN decks that are running Global Food to just try and pump out agendas, fast advance out Global Foods in one turn. Crazy stuff. And at just the risk of a Beal. It's awesome. And John getting that other prepaid out, which I am sure he's going to put to use very, very soon. Making some free Maker's Eye runs or legworks here. And Raphael choosing to install an upgrade over the remote, or excuse me, over R&D. I didn't see what it was. I would expect a Chrysium Grid play here. That's a card that is super common right now. An awesome card, especially with all of the when successful effects that are going around. I know Data Sucker is starting to fall out of favor a little bit. At least it was, Timmy Wong famously has not played it in his Worlds deck. He just went with Parasites. There's just so much Cyberdeck's Virus Suite play that we are starting to see cards like that fall out of favor, which is extremely surprising. Given the strength of the card, of course. But so yeah, I would expect that to be a Chrysium Grid over the R&D, which of course would protect Raphael from the Maker's Eyes. And John just checking his discard, probably trying to see if anything is really worthwhile here. But with all of that multi-access in John's hand and the lucky finds and the money, I think John's best bet, is to play some of this out, really benefit from his cards that he has in play, and then levy afterwards. So John just gaining money and running R&D. I'm positive he is betting that's a Chrysium Grid and trying to weasel it out now. And Raphael resing the Victor 1. Often unplayed. I really don't see this card often, but it's good. It's an enigma. It's a higher strength enigma, and the only thing that is really unaffected by this strength difference is Yogg. But Yogg, now being on the most wanted list, I expect to see a little less play from it, especially out of faction where it now costs 2 influence. But Victor's a good card. It would cost Gordian Blade 3 to get through, and John opting instead to go with the Atman to take care Atman at 3, which is going to take care of the Architect problem as well. So between Architect and Victor, John's definitely going to get his money's worth with the Atman. Very smartly opting to go for that play instead of trying to install the Gordian Blade and then get another breaker for the Architect. And even though he can't, he wasn't able to trash the Cursium Grid after all that was done and getting the Atman in play, did end up with an agenda. So I would still call that a win for John. Now he just has to kind of try and finish it off. But the game is definitely still up for grabs. Raphael can install Advance, Global Food, and threaten a win out of that remote. And he does have money, so I'm wondering why Raphael didn't decide to res whatever's in front of the Victor. Maybe it's something that's more expensive. Maybe it's a Heimdall or something like that. But instead of trying to protect it, Raphael is putting on some pressure with that remote and installing 2 cards. Or, I believe it was 2. Yeah, he installed 2 cards in the remote and then gained a credit. So this could be a Breaker Bay play to try and bait some good stuff out of John, maybe try and get him to spend some of his technical writer bucks, which is overflowing. That writer is busy making some instruction manuals, and John's definitely trying to get up. And John's deck, really, this Prepaid Kate, is hitting its stride. This is when it is the most dangerous. He has his recursion, he has his prepaids, he has a butt ton of money on call, and he can get anything in his deck at any point in time. Between the clone ship and the SMC, everything is up for grabs. And John is installing the Sacrificial Construct, which is another one of those cards you don't see played often before he levies. So opting not to go for the legwork or the Maker's Eye here, and instead just trying to refresh his cards. And I think at this point that's definitely the right play. We've seen a lot of cards go through, and a lot of his events that are worth money are in his, were in his discard pile, now back in his deck. There's a lot of multi-access in his hand, or in his deck, which now is in his hand. And there's a lot of things that John has to benefit from by recycling his deck right now. For the levy, John is using the technical writer. I think this might have been a little bit of a misplay here. I feel like John is a little bit tired at this point. I feel like he should have popped the technical writer and then levied to at least get that technical writer back in his deck. I could be totally wrong. Maybe John didn't want one of those technical writers back in, since he has the second one or third one really still available to him in his deck. But I don't know. I think he could have done it a different way here. And Raphael did go for the Eve, so he might just be using that server as kind of a placeholder until he finds something better. But in the meantime, the active Eve, in addition to HP's ability, Raphael can just build. He is, R&D is a little bit vulnerable, but it's only vulnerable through single accesses. So Raphael could either bulk up R&D a little bit more. I do see the ice in his hand. I'm not sure what he could have there, but he must be feeling really, really confident over R&D. And sure enough, that's what John goes for. and resing the Architect. So John gets an access for $4 on this server. Interesting. In the access, that's not what he wants to see, I'm sure. And John trashing the Chrysium grid. So Maker's Eye is back online. I'm really surprised here Raphael has not iced up the remote anymore, or I keep saying that Raphael hasn't iced up the central R&D any more than he has. That is a little bit of a leaky faucet. I think that's his biggest leak right now. Obviously Raphael doesn't have anything in his hand. I think he would try and score that out if he did. I might be wrong there. But leaving R&D this open, I think, is a concern. There's nothing stopping John aside from a credit. John needs one more credit to Maker's Eye into R&D to steal an NAPD. That's a little bit on the risky side of things. I'm sure Raphael would like more protection, and I see it. We see the Turing, and honestly, the Turing over R&D right now would be super good. And that's something that so that's what Raphael decides to do, only for $1, making huge use out of HB's money. This is a play I've seen quite a bit. It's really good against Anarchs too, is a Turing over a Central a lot of the times can keep runners, or more specifically Anarchs, out. Just because they're relying on Faust to get through the Centrals. And so it's an Ichi over R&D and not that Turing. John does have a click he can spend, and he does have the Sacrificial Construct, so that trace probably isn't going to go anywhere. So John letting one of the trashes fire, with the safety of the Sacrificial Construct, and this just leaves R&D open. It's $4. Well, the Ichi makes it a little bit more money, but $4 now gets John in. That Chrysium, this is just a vanilla run, so Chrysium Grid's not going to do him any good here. And, hitting the global food, and there's the game. Congratulations, John. That was a great matchup. Thank you for watching, and catch you next time.